Okay, we're recording this webinar and we will be starting right now. As you start moving in, we have quite a few people signed up today, so we'll wait a minute or two to get everyone in. I'm Janda, I'm the coordinator at the EnviroHouse, and that's the building behind me. We hope to open soon, and we'll be posting that when we are. John Inch is our presenter today, and John will tell you a little bit about himself in a minute. If you have not done a webinar before, I think most people have, but if you haven't, there should be a bar at the bottom of your screen or the top or somewhere on your screen that shows you where you can do Q&A or chat. We encourage you to use the chat feature because it shows up in the side panel, and the Q&A questions, once they're answered, they go away. So information in the chat you can copy. So if there's information there that you want to keep, then you can copy that and keep it. And I think it shows up also as supposed to in the recorded version. These are recorded. They will be posted on the city's YouTube channel, and whenever our media team can get to getting them up. Hopefully that will be in another week. Can't guarantee that. We will have some polls, and I will put that first one up while John is introducing himself, so you can answer that. And then we will move forward into the webinar and hope that the rest of the folks get with us soon. If we don't have a lot of people in here when we get through, if they're not, 30 people on or something, we can possibly take questions. If you have a complicated question, we can put the unmute you so you can ask your question in person, raise your hand, and I'll let you know if we can do that. So I think those are my primary announcements. I will tell you later about upcoming webinars, what we've got next, and some additional information. And John Inch is one of our Enviro Challengers with the City of Tacoma. He teaches about environmental stuff all the time. So I'm going to turn it over to John and let him introduce himself, and then we'll get into the presentation. Thank you.
Well, hi. As I said, as Janda said, I work for the City of Tacoma in the Enviro Challenger program. I've been there for 15 plus years now, and I've had the awesome opportunity to be able to teach in almost all of our schools in the City of Tacoma. Not quite all the high schools, but all the middle schools, all the elementary schools, and share lessons that deal with our environmental services department, and particularly centered around solid waste issues like garbage and recycling, yard waste, composting, and also non-toxic cleaners, so that we can get away from hazardous chemicals in the home, and also the disposal issues of said chemicals. We also cover issues for our surface water program, or stormwater, as it pertains to the groundwater after our rains, and where they go, and how they're dealt with, and what's in those waters. So we try to teach and educate folks on our stormwater system, and then also, last but certainly not least, our wastewater program, where we deal with things that flush out of our house. So we get to go into the elementary school starting, actually now we started in the kindergarten with Gator, who does art programs for a lot of the younger classes as ways to get them involved with some of that science. And then we start with our main lessons at the 2nd grade and go all the way up through the 8th grade, and occasionally do high school programs. In addition to that, we also do, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if we have any teachers on here, I will put the Enviro Challenger email in the website. And if we have any Tacoma teachers listening in, feel free to send them an email and see what the program's about.
Yeah. We also do community events when they're going on. So they are starting up again. We have the mask mandates have been lifted, so we will probably be out in community programming pretty soon, actually, for the South Sound Sustainability Expo in April 16th, down at the University of Washington, Tacoma, sorry. We'll be there along with a host of other vendors promoting sustainable living options and different kinds of sustainably minded programming going on in the city. So that's probably going to be our very first community event. So.
And that will be on the Prairie Line Trail. I think it's behind most of the buildings at UWT. Yeah. And that information is on the city's website. I'll try to find that and put that in here. I should have had that up. And also I wanted to mention, if you haven't done this before, at the bottom of your chat screen, there's 3 ellipses, little dots over on the right side at the bottom. If you click on that, you can change your chat so that it goes to everyone instead of just me, to John and me. And then that way, all of you can see the question and the answer. Okay. So with that, are you ready, John? I will pop up if there's anything in the chat that you need to answer. Other than that, just carry on.
Excellent. Thank you. So again, if anybody popped on, my name is John. I work in the Enviro Challenger program. And today, one of my fun things to do is to talk about composting. It's I just love the fact that this is something that we can all do and share this resource, and hopefully inspire folks to give it a shot. I'd also like to today learn from you. So I just want you all to know, by no means am I necessarily an expert. I'm not a certified master composter or anything like that. I've just been working at this for many years now, with off and on luck. So if there's anybody out there that has had greater success, I always like to glean what I can from those that I'm with. And I'd also like to share some of my my losses. It happens. So, with that, we will move on. So, when we do composting, we're just managing a cycle that nature's been doing for ages and ages and ages. And we're just going to convert the organic material that we have in our yard, as well as stuff from our kitchen as included. And we're going to help to turn this into an organic material, not dirt, but more, what's referred to as humus, not hummus, humus. Hummus is what we eat. Humus is what's under our feet. So again, you can see this is just biological decomposition, organic material breaking down. But we're gonna take it out of nature. We're gonna put it into a pile type situation, and we are going to control what happens here. We're going to help by controlling some of the air that gets in there, make it one of those aerobic products, versus stuff that just kind of sits there. If you've ever had a pile of materials that sat for a while and then you moved it, that's what the anaerobic decomposition smells like. And that's another way that nature takes care of its business. This is things like swamps and bogs and places like that. But we're going to try to get away from that process. We're going to do more of our aerobic process. So I believe this brings us to, or do we already want to skip this one and keep moving, Janda? I'll keep moving here. All right. So why would we want to compost? As it states, there's a lot of household waste that is organic. And we can actually reduce these materials that wind up in our landfills. And it's a great way to, environmentally consciously reduce that waste. You need to think of all the meal prep, spoiled food, uneaten leftovers, things buried deep in the freezer. These are things that it's estimated that wind up in our landfill that make up about 1/10 of the garbage that's in the landfill. So instead of tossing out things that would wind up in the landfill and really just produce a more noxious greenhouse gas, we could put them in a pile, be a little bit proactive with it, and turn that into some wonderful garden material. Especially if you're doing raised beds, this is a great way to get material for those raised beds. Another reason to compost is that it's cheaper than buying store-bought compost, so you're going to save some money that way. You're increasing your soil structure, the aeration, and actually how fertile that soil is. Things like nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, those are all our big nutrients. Those are the NPKs that we hear about. But then there's a host of other micronutrients like calcium and magnesium and manganese. And there's things that are in our soils that are living and breaking materials down. I'd read somewhere one time that there are more than like a billion microbes living in a healthy spoonful of soil out there. So all of that needs food, and they're going to compete for what you can, and you can actually produce enough food for them through your yard scraps and your food waste, and then in turn you can produce enough compost that you might be able to smother weeds and provide beneficial nutrients around your plants. So using it as a mulch to keep down those weeds also helps to retain water right around the base of those plants as well. So it's kind of a double whammy for you. So I'd like to kind of get into some factors that are affecting compost, but I see we have a poll question coming up here.
I'm not sure I can pull that up, John, because when the first one gets closed, if I don't go into the next one, I can't get the next one up. So the next poll question was, I think it was what size is your property? Are you ready for that?
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay. The one that we skipped was, what problems do you have with composting? Is that the one that might be better?
Yeah, let's go to that one first.
Okay.
So what problems do you have?
If you have a chance to answer this in the chat, this was the poll question that's supposed to come up, is what problems or issues do you have with composting? Don't have enough green or brown material, gets too wet or stays too dry, doesn't get hot enough to break down, unpleasant odors, attracts critters, or other. So if you want to answer that in the chat, then we can see if we can answer any of those if you have problems with those. And meanwhile, John, you can just kind of keep talking and I'll watch for that.
Okay. Okay. So some factors that would go into affecting our compost. One of the big ones is the temperature. So we have some ranges here for you to work with. People like ranges. So there are two different ranges that we're going to talk about because the way that decomposition works, they work under different heat. So somewhere between 70 and about 115 degrees Fahrenheit, this is what we would call like a cold pile. And so when we get above that, 120 to 140 to 150 degrees, this is where you start talking about hot piles. And cold piles will definitely take longer to break down. And hot piles can break down a little bit more quickly because you're actually turning the pile instead of letting just the microbes do their job of munching their way through everything. You're turning the outside of the pile to the inside of the pile and bringing the outside or the inside to the outside, and then those critters that are on the outside want to kind of go back to the inside. So they, some of them will eat their way back, some of them will burrow their way back, and when they get there, they're going to find fresh food. So the more you turn that pile on those hot composts, because you've got so much microbial action going on, you actually get warmer temperatures. And so this is desirable for a lot of people because it would help to break down any undesirable things that might be in the soil. Some temperatures can actually even kill weed seeds and little sprouting weeds too. So there can be some benefits. The cold compost, that's the slow game. That's that long con. So if you're not really that active or want to be that proactive, there is that method for you out there, which is actually, that was my dad's favorite method. We'll talk more about that later. So if you want to get into reading your temperatures, you're going to obviously want some sort of a thermometer. So you don't want to take one from the house that everybody uses. That's kind of gross. The infrared thermometers that we've been using for our forehead reads is only going to read the surface, just like it reads our forehead temperature. So you need something that's going to go into your pile, and you want to be able to get in there as far as you can. So there are actually dedicated composting thermometers that are available. I've seen them at McClendon's. They usually start around 24 to 25 bucks. I feel like with the way things have kind of gone up lately, it's probably closer to like $29 now. So that is a fairly expensive thermometer to get. It is a long-reaching thermometer though, so if that's what you want, that'll work for you. But there is another way to go, and that is if you go and get a candy thermometer, and you can find these available at the dollar stores pretty easily, or even at Fred Meyer. Or another one would be like a long turkey thermometer, not the little pop-up ones, but the longer ones. They're not nearly as expensive. They're only about a foot long, but they can definitely do the job. I mean, you could dig down a little bit into your pile so it gets a little deeper if you need to. So there's a reasonable alternative. But there are actually dedicated composting thermometers out there. So I don't know if around here we would ever have our piles get above 150 degrees. It just doesn't seem, maybe that 3-day stretch we had last summer, that might have done that. But a lot of times folks feel like when it gets to be too hot, all the bugs and stuff have retreated to the very core. The microbes have gone to the very core. And so it's actually going to be a big slowdown for the pile. And so this is where you'll get people who might spray their piles down, which is also a benefit because you want moisture content in there. But this is also where people will kind of get active, so that you can kind of like break the pile out. You can break it into pieces, or you can turn the pile. But for the most part, you want to get it to temperatures up to around 150 degrees. But if it's too hot, it will cause all your little critters to kind of just back out of the pile and not be as effective. So sometimes shade can benefit those, but here in Washington, it's pretty rare.
John?
Yes, sorry. Cut me off.
Have a comment we did have a comment in the chat about one person is worried about the right balance of green and brown and the consistency with routine. That's from Nancy, and Art is mentioning problems with composting all at one time or another. So just so you know those.
Could you read me what the first one was again?
Worried about the right balance of greens and browns and consistency with her own routine.
Okay, so are you talking about having like a scheduled routine of going out and turning the pile or things like that?
I'm guessing that's what it is.
Okay,
yeah.
So we can talk about that too. And every problem all at once, or all yeah. I mean, that's composting, isn't it? These atmospheric rivers that we've been experiencing lately have been a real downer to my compost piles out there. So I can appreciate that, and it's thrown my consistent schedule off as well too. So I can appreciate that a great deal. So I'll try to do my best to deal with those. They might come up as my own areas where I have fallen short. So I'll try to make sure to keep that in mind. Which kind of goes into like another factor is the influence of oxygen or fresh air into your pile. If you're not out there turning it often, or if the rains that we've experienced come in and maybe dampen your pile quite a bit, you might start to smell that anaerobic decomposition because there's no oxygen getting in there. Kind of think about your fitness routines. Like, it's a lot different, like lifting weights. That's not very aerobic, whereas like running in place or treadmill work, that's very aerobic. Your heart's pumping, your lungs are going. So there's the same thing going on in our piles, and we want to make sure there's enough oxygen getting in there. So when things get wet like they've gotten lately, or maybe it's not been wet and you're cutting your grass, and you're going to take those fresh green grass clippings and put them out in the pile. Well, those fresh green grass clippings are actually going to have a lot of moisture that they give off, and then they're actually going to compress. That fluffy grass will compress down as the moisture is dissipating, and then it'll mush it together and block oxygen and air from getting through. So if you can have a regular schedule, and this can vary for everybody of all abilities, and there are tools and composting tumblers that can help us do this as well. But for somebody who's going to go out and turn a pile, if you can turn it 1 or 2 times a week, that's great. You know, you're going to actually help move things along maybe in about a month or so. If you're a little less active than that, it's you know, only 1 time a week or even not, then it's going to be more on that cold composting process. If you get out there and hit your compost pile 3 or 4 times a week, or if you're, you know, going to use that as a way to do some exercise, and you're going to do it, you know, as a part of that kind of routine, an exercise routine for your own wellness, then you're probably going to get your compost turned a lot quicker. I read an old pamphlet some time ago that said if you're out there and you turn your compost every single day, you can be cranking out compost every 14 days. So you know, we got jobs though, so you kind of got to pick your schedule and then make that routine and keep as consistent as possible. I know it's difficult when the weather's kind of, you know, obstructing us, so you might have to make up and do 2 days in a row when it's drier. Here's that moisture content. You know, if you want to know what a proper moisture content is like, you know, it's just simply be familiar with the towel that you use to dry off after the shower, or a sponge, like we said here, a sponge that's been wrung out to clean off the kitchen table. Not the ones your kids might get, you know, a big soppy one that leaves a massive trail of water behind it. That's too wet. You want something that's just going to be able to pick up those crumbs. So you want your pile to feel wet. You want to know that there's moisture in it, but you don't necessarily want to be able to wring it and see water come out of it. So again, I think for me, a damp sponge or the damp towel after the shower works for me. I'm going to back up just a second too, because I want to make sure that if again, we've had these heavy rains coming, and we should probably expect a few more, and you know that I'm kind of anticipating that this is going to be our you know, trending atmospheric type event going on here, these big deluges. So covering with a tarp can be very handy. Sorry, there was a fly in my face. It can be very handy to keep it from getting too wet on some of these days. I know it's one more thing to do, but it definitely can help in the long run, especially if you've just created this pile and you're trying to get it to work. It can be very frustrating. It gets wet and then it dries out completely. And then in the summer months, make sure to take it off so that you don't let it get, you know, overly dry. So it's that balancing of that moisture.
Hey, John, that probably would not apply as much if you have like the wooden open bin.
If you have the open bin, you might want to cover up the top periodically on some of those big heavy rains we've had. But then again, that open bin, the way that it's set up, if you have like a 3-bin system, the way they're set up is it should be able to drain off moisture. So that's you know, most of the time I think, you know, we worry about the piles. That's what we often talk about. Bins are really nice because they do kind of, you know, allow water to shed some. So some of the other factors that might affect your compost pile, and sorry folks, this is going to be the math portion of the program, as you can see, numbers and ratios again. So you want to find things, or let me back up here. Things that are high in what are called carbon are often called brown materials. So those are things like your dead grass, your dead leaves, dead branches, dead flowers, things I often think of things that have turned brown. They were green or full of color or whatnot, and then they've kind of turned brown as all their moisture has faded away. Those are our carbons. Those are our browns. And then things that are high in like nitrogen, like your fresh green grass, or your pulling weeds before they've hit their flower. They're at that thread phase. Just a couple of leaves have come out, or you're cutting stems off of flowers. Those green portions there, those are referred to as green materials. And the important thing to take away from all of this is to be sure that you have a few more brown materials in your piles, a few more of those dried carbon type materials in your pile versus green materials. And that's a helpful balance. So, you know, in our ratios here, you can see they talk about these 25 to 1s. I did see one that said somewhere, you know, 40 to 1. That's a lot to think about. Some people go 50-50. I do definitely encourage you to try to have more brown materials in your pile than you do have green materials. So, you know, you might have to hold off on putting your grass in a pile right away. You know, you might want to let it sit off to the side so it can dry some. Or if you have dried corn stalks, you know, put those in there as a layer. Old papers. This is a great place for your old financial documents. You know, if you shred your stuff at home, you can put them in the pile here. If you have access to old wood chips, you can see that wood chips are, but you want to make sure they're aged wood chips. You don't ever want to use fresh wood chips because they're still a high nitrogen source. You want to make sure that these are very aged. And that's how you'll get a higher carbon material. But and then your nitrogens, your high nitrogens, or your green materials, those are going to be fresh grass clippings. But again, you want to be very selective in how much grass you put in. Don't put the whole pile in there all at once. Kind of dole it out, ration it. And then food waste is obviously another one of our great green materials that we can put in there as well. And we do want to watch out, though, if we're putting in any plants or lawn clippings, to be sure that we're not including anything that has fertilizers or pesticides. We want to keep it chemical free. So if we can, you know, if that means shifting our yard maintenance practices or our best management practices for our yard, and shifting away from chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides for cleaner compost, that might be something to contemplate. Otherwise, you're just going to need another spot for those clippings that have been treated with anything, because you don't want to put it into a pile where you're actually going to be using insects to be doing, you know, the breaking down work for you. So you want to make sure, you know, this process can take 2 weeks to 2 years, depending on your hot or cold pile, how much carbon versus nitrogen products you're having in there. But one of the things is that anything we would go and throw in a garbage can, any organic material, those beautiful green materials, anything that we throw in the landfill, never decomposes. So it just kind of, there's no oxygen there. So it's this time capsule. Now, 2 years, that's something I'm going to talk about my dad and his method, because he was a cold composter, and he definitely he created piles by the year. And my brother and I didn't understand this for a long time when we were kids. You know, he would just make a pile here, and he would just say, when I tell you to throw it in a compost pile, I want you to throw it in this compost pile. And then the next year he would say the same thing, but it would be a different pile altogether. And then he would, the pile from last year was named after that year. So, you know, we'll say 1982. So as the years went on, and my dad would, you know, want compost for in his flower beds, he would tell us to go out and, you know, get me some compost from that pile from 1982. And so, you know, we would, And then it was, now go get me some from 1983. And it was almost like, you know, this fine fine aged wine for him or something, you know. It was fine aged compost is really what it was. And it took me years and years and years to figure out. My dad was a cold composter, and he just thought nature can do its job. And so in the meanwhile, we just had these piles of leaves and grass clippings and branches and all the trimmings and everything in the back, and we never touched them. We just left them out there. And you know, you go from these big massive heaps that were taller than we were to, you know, fairly moderate mounds of wonderful, you know, wormy humus to take out and put around our plants. So my dad was more of the 2-year kind of guy. And so, you know, that was the lesson I learned from him, is if you really want to, you can just take your time. But if you want to speed it up, which sometimes people do because they don't have the space to let piles of stuff sit around and break down on their own, you can, you know, remember that you're feeding small mouths. So chopping or shredding stuff into small pieces is very handy. You know, make sure that you have, you know, some equal amounts. This is one way to speed it up, is if you have equal amounts of greens and browns, but you only want to do that until your pile really heats up. And then you want to kind of go back into that balance of a few more browns, because then you'll start to develop smells. So you want to watch out for that. Anytime your pile smells, it's always a sign something's going on. The more you turn the pile, the more the little critters in the pile get that new food. So try to set up a schedule. I know it's tough to stay consistent when our weather is so inconsistent, but again, if you have to skip a couple of days because the rain is coming, you know, maybe throw a tarp over it. And then when you can get back to it, it won't be so soggy and heavy that you can't turn the pile. Because I know a wet pile is a heavy pile, so you want to make sure to let it get moist, but just not too wet, because again, a wet pile is a heavy pile. And you know, I'm getting older, we're all getting older, and that might not work with some of our back issues. So, you know, you got to know yourself sometimes too. So throw a tarp over it, might save you a little bit. Here's just a simple list of things to not go in the compost pile. So when we're talking about our compost pile in our backyard, we don't want to put any meat out there. Non-ground bones. So we're talking about like whole bones. If you hold on to a chicken carcass for making stock or things like that, or bone broth or things like that, you know, don't throw those bones out there. It just takes too long for it to break down. Nature will do that, but it takes. That might be in my dad's pile for sure. No disease plants, obviously. Watch out for greases and fats. No use kitty litter, because we don't want kitty waste out there. There can be bugs and parasites in there. If you are going to put your papers out there, make sure that it's not colored advertisements or anything like that. No waxy papers. And make sure there's no treated wood or sawdust that goes out there. It just doesn't break down, and it's not good. It leaches out, you know, coppers and things into the compost. You don't want that carrying around. Dairy products is the same thing with like the meat. It just smells bad. It attracts the wrong type of company. You don't really want to find out if you got raccoons or possums in the neighborhood. If you do, then there's several of these that you can put out there and have that National Geographic experience. But watch out for weeds that are going to seed or already seedy, because then you're just putting them in a perfect environment for those seeds to take host and grow. And again, like with the used kitty litter, we don't want to put any cat waste, dog waste, or human waste in there. So in your compost pile, for those of you that are wanting to know who's doing all the work and taking the activity down in there, or what you're just looking at, here are some examples of what that compost pile food web might look like. From the biggest to the smallest, they're just doing an amazing job down there for us all. So Jan, I see we have another poll question coming up. This one we might talk about yard size. Or I can keep moving and we'll have time for questions. Oh, there it is.
Sorry, I was talking to you and I was muted. So,
That's funny because I can't see you, so I can't help you with that. I just see an EnviroHouse logo, so I'm like, I don't know if she's talking to me or not.
well, I'm here.
There we are.
Okay, so far we have,
Standard size city lot.
yeah. So it looks like that's most of the people that have answered. We may have somebody phoning in who can't do this. Okay, we have another answer. So I will go ahead and elaborate on this just in case anyone is phoning in. The question is, what size is your property or space limitations? Standard size city lot, big size urban lot, large property outside the city, an acre or more, or other. So it looks like we have 100% so far on standard size city lots. So I will end that poll, share the results. It's pretty obvious. I'll stop sharing. And then we do have one more poll question toward the end on when you get to it on what kind of bin you want or have.
Okay. Cool. So standard size city lots. I currently live on a farm between Tacoma and Puyallup, but I used to reside in a standard city lot in the city of Tacoma, and I composted there as well. For just a moment, I need to back up because there was one particular service that the city does offer for those that live within the city of Tacoma. For a lot of the things that are on the no list, especially when it comes to the food items that were on the no list, the greasy foods, the meats, the dairy products, those are actually accepted in our brown bins within the city of Tacoma. So these two exercises can go hand in hand, and by using the brown bin, it actually does keep it out of the landfill. It goes out to the compost factory at 176 in Meridian, where they take all of the brown bin materials from the city and all throughout the county, and they turn that into what's called cascade compost. So I just want you to know that that was another alternative to throwing the meat and bones and dairy stuff like cheese and sour creams and all that stuff away. You can put it in your brown bin and it will go to a place to be made in the compost on a commercial level. They got machines that turn this stuff on the just constantly. So let's talk about types of compost and setups. Again, my dad's favorite thing was piles done by the year. So that's one method. Just remember that. You can always go that way. When we talk about piles for compost, and I'm going to start this way in the very unruly world of creating compost piles, then I'm going to bring it into some of the bins that we can use and some of the different ways that we can structure our composting, especially for standard size lots. And I'll try to explain what I did to compost as well. So piles are very simple. Just think about how easily you'll be able to turn your pile. If your piles get too big, you'll struggle to turn it by hand. So, again, my dad just liked to make these piles that were about the size of us. So they were, at that time we were, I don't know, maybe 3, maybe 4 feet tall. So, he just never went really much taller than we were. Sometimes they'd get really big, especially as it was like the time of year when leaves were falling off the trees, and the combination of leaves and the grass, the piles could get pretty large, but they would always settle down to something much smaller. If you're going to use a bin system, you're often going to find that you're going to use something that's going to be more in that 3 by 3 by 3 category. And you might even find that it has multiple bins to allow you to turn that section of the bin and allow for more of the decomposition to happen. And then there's also a number of tumblers that are out there that we'll talk as well. Sometimes though, with the tumblers, you do need to be aware that you will need something secondary to hold on to materials while the other material is spinning because you filled it. So you might either get 2 tumblers or a secondary like garbage can, like a little group garbage can to hold on to your stuff. My dad had 2 food waste tumblers that he never turned, and he just stuffed them full. And so I remember going out there and looking one time, and you know, everything looked exactly the way it was when he put it in there. And he's like, yeah, nothing ever turns in there. So that's why I didn't like them. But again, you can see here's one style of pile, pretty classic. And a lot of times when people build their piles, they'll try to build them in like the layers of the browns and the greens, the browns and the greens. Other ways you can do this is if you have some chicken wire, you can set something up in like a 3-ring circle, about 3-4 feet tall, and wire it up. Garbage cans with holes, or a plastic bin where you're going to do some worm bin composting. These are all ways that you can kind of compost on those small standard lots that we might live in on the city of Tacoma or in our surrounding communities. If you've ever seen snow fencing or the little picket fencing that's available at places like Home Depot, this is another way that you can corral that compost, build your pile inside there. Cinder blocks are available at a lot of our stores, even at some of our secondhand stores. I see cinder blocks available as well. And if you're, you know, clever and creative, you can build yourself a little bin system this way. My favorite bin here on the farm started off with the pallet system with 3 bins, and it's very simple. You can actually just start by making one, and then you can add to it. Pallets are found in a lot of places throughout the city of Tacoma. Another one that I used, this is what I actually used in our Tacoma house, was more of this 3 bin system. And this is available. I believe we have a link to make this from Pierce County. They have a great model of this, and I modified it a little bit to fit my needs. And so I made it so that the compost moves laterally through, and that the top of it was like a bench top. So I had a nice bench in my backyard. I modified the dimensions so that it was easy enough to sit on. I believe I did go with like 32 inches so you could sit on it and it was comfortable. And then they had removable dividers. So as the one pile got to be too large, I would just shuffle it off to the next bin and put the divider back down. And then I had a spot where I'd start my compost all over again. And then by the time I got to the 3rd bin, I had turned it a number of times. It was pretty much ready to be used. Most of the worms that were left in there or critters have already migrated back to the other pile because they were still able to touch through the screens. So this was my little bench. It looked nice. It was a nice presentation in the backyard. We had company over. We put a tarp over it and then tell people afterwards, yeah, there's been composting going on underneath it. That's where your scraps are going to go. When we get into tumblers are a little bit different system. So if you've got that standard size yard in Tacoma and you don't want to have a bin system because it's unsightly, or you're not going to, you don't have the space necessarily to fit a number of bins together, but one of these tumblers fits the small footprint that you have. There's a number of these that are wonderful for that, but I do want to stress you that you'll have to stop putting scraps in a tumbler, and you can only put food scraps really in these tumblers. You'll have to stop at a certain point so that it can actually do its process of mixing. It's kind of like your laundry. You don't pack and pack and pack and pack and pack and pack the laundry in your wash machine, because if you did that, nothing would really spin. So these tumblers work the same way. There's a limit, and that means that you're going to need a second one or another container to hold onto the food scraps while this one's doing its job. So, and a lot of times these tumblers use up heat and the trapped moisture on the inside to do the job of breaking it down. Some people are clever and creative. So if you had access to like a 55-gallon drum or one of these plastic barrels that you see around, you might be able to create your own. And it's all about turning, and you get that compost back out of it. Here's some examples of tumblers. Some of these we have over at the EnviroHouse. I believe actually we have examples of all of these over at the EnviroHouse. But again, as I said, you'll need to consider having 2 of these so that one can do the job, and then you can start working on the other one. Even with a bin system, at some point, like your 3-bin system, what's really convenient is if you have one bin that's full, you don't have to shift it over. You can just go to the next bin over and start putting your food scraps there and just play with your first pile that you created, turning it and aerating it. With these, again, you're going to put those scraps in there. You'll stop somewhere about halfway through and you'll spin it. until it stops looking like food scraps and looks more like the humus that you want to add to your food stuff. For those of you who are Doctor Who fans, the lower right on my screen, the one that looks like a little Dalek, that was the one that my dad used. And I found it very interesting that he chose to use these. And when he got these, he got them, they were like a Sam's Club, Costco kind of thing, deal. And we talked about it. I told him it's really just for food scraps, and he goes, "No, I'm gonna put all of it in there." I was like, "Okay." So he filled one up right away, and I do mean filled up. I mean it was right to the top. And I remember going home for a visit, and I was like, "You got to leave room for these. They can't. It's going to take a long time for this stuff to break down." No. So we got a second one, and it got filled up very quickly as well. And so he decided to go back to the first one and see what was happening. So he pulled that little window out at the bottom, and it is a little window for sure. And it's low to the ground. And my dad was doing this in his mid-50s, and he had a bad back. And so my point of saying this is to know yourself and know what works for you ergonomically. If stooping down to that small little window to get your compost out, which is what you need to do, you got to shovel it out from the bottom there. If that's going to be difficult, this isn't the right system for you. There's other ones that'll work, ones that have an opening at the top that's easier to use, or it's a smaller tumbler that's easier to spin, or something that's a little more convenient to dump stuff out. So just understand yourself and how your body works and what you're going to need to do to get the final product out. And here is, I believe, our last poll question.
That was basically asking people if what kind of bin they had or wanted, and you kind of have covered that. So
okay,
you probably just go on.
Well, I believe that we have reached our resource point here.
Okay, well, you talked about those for a second, and I will keep putting things in the chat then, because I did add the one on the composting, the second one there, which is the Pierce County one on the compost bins.
Excellent.
I put that in the chat, and I will add if you want to cover the book titles.
Okay, so I move to, here we go. So one of my favorite books that I have read on here is the one on the bottom, The Earth Moved. And it is a wonderful book about earthworms, worms, their impacts, kind of how they've been studied in history. It's a lot of fun. Then at the top is a very classic book, especially if you have kids, it's called Worms Eat My Garbage. And it's just a very fun way to get into talking about the worms in composting and what's doing the work out there. If you're wanting for something more dedicated to composting, then we have the composting cookbook, as well as Let It Rot. Let It Rot is definitely a classic in the world of composting. You can glean a lot of information from these folks. And, just kind of, especially the Earth Move, that one kind of furthered my understanding of the different kinds of little worms that are out there doing jobs for us. And, when I move my potted plants or, something that's at the surface, I now know I'm not looking just at earthworms. There's something like 3,000 different kinds of worms around the planet. So just a fascinating little story and tale of the remarkable achievements of earthworms. Before we go, we have plenty of time if people have questions. I managed to get through that a little bit more swiftly than I had anticipated.
Yeah, folks can put their questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can share the screen, share your voice, because we don't have that many folks in here this morning.
Why don't I'll I'll stop sharing and then we can bring up the chat. How's that? Or you want
You
me to
can
leave these
see, we can
resources up
see
for
the
the-
chat. Everybody can see the
Oh,
chat
okay.
if you just click on that chat at the
Yep, there we go.
bottom. If you do you have the page that I sent with the other links to bring up? The Word doc, is that up?
Let me see.
If it's not, I can just start putting those things in too. While John's getting that, I will mention that I've got so many pages open here. We have upcoming workshops. The one next Saturday will be with Jenny Call on starting your spring garden. She's done several with us, and so we'll be talking about getting your beds ready, planting if you haven't started already, what you can plant for the summer, and so on and so forth. The April through June workshops will be put online soon, and those will include April 9, it will be native plants. April 23rd, it will be worm bins with John, composting with worm bins. And then the end of April, it will be growing herbs. And in the middle of all that, on the 16th, is the South Side Sustainability Expo on the 16th. And I'm looking back up to see if I added that. I don't think I did yet. If I did, this will go in twice. So I'm going to add that link. I don't see any hands raised. If anyone does have questions, put it in the chat or raise your hand. And that one I didn't get. I missed John's worm bin. I'm sorry. In that list.
That's all right.
So we will be back and we will practice a little more. So we'll have this. And then I'm also going to put in, most of you know how to do this already, but these are the recorded webinars. If you want to see past webinars that have been presented, you can go to cityoftacoma.org / well, no, I'm sorry, youtube.com/cityoftacoma /playlists. I will also put the information on where you can register for workshops. And then if you don't know, I'm going to put in here, if any of you do not have this information on how to find to use the EnviroNews listserv. That's a listserv where the city used to manage that. The Citizens for Healthy Bay manage it now. And it's an opportunity to see posts on workshops coming up, on events happening. It's all environmental activities. It includes things like job announcements. The Sustainability Expo information will be on there. There's a lot of information and very easy to just delete if you don't want any of that. So I will put that in there. And then if you want to register for an upcoming workshop, it is cityoftacoma.org /workshops. And I will put my information in there if you have any questions, or if you want me to email this list to you, you can get in touch with me. And I would be happy to do that. So I guess if that's it, we will just wrap it up because I don't see any other questions. John, do you have any closing comments?
I'd like to thank everybody for sharing their time with us this morning. I know that sun kind of popped out there, and great to be outside when we can on these rainy days. So I appreciate your time, and I want to thank you for spending it with me. So that's it.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And if you do want any of this emailed to you, please send me an email, ehouse@cityoftacoma.org, EnviroHouse, or ehouse@cityoftacoma.org is my email for the EnviroHouse, or my personal one, which I just put in there, my work personal one. So thank you for attending, and John, I'll talk to you later, and hopefully we'll
Right,
see
Shannon.
all the rest of you back soon.
Thanks, folks.
Okay, bye.